relation with Hegel and all of that. Um, you took questions from Saloni, Digvijay, me, and Titiksha, and we discussed again the substance, the idea of substance in Aristotelian logic and Hegelian logic, and we discussed the Hegelian logic again because that was, that was a part of what we did in the previous class. I think that is it. We didn't move any further, so yeah.
We did discuss something else also, apart from the doubt session. Who remembers that?
Sir, I can try.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. We talked about how Hegel introduces the notion of temporality into the process of knowledge. And am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Yes. And then one of the things that was introduced in yesterday's class was the equating reason with freedom, reason slash rationality with freedom, and
Right.
how we have become more freer from past. And one of the things that Hegel comes up with is that since we have progressed with our increased reason and rationality, we are more freer from the past, but we are less freer. We are bound by the future. I'm not clear about the notion of bounded by the future, but yes, the notion of being more progressive than the past in terms of rationality was talked about yesterday. And and
Yeah.
in that sense, rationality is a linear process of increase. So we came up with the example of how the nomads or the pre-feudal people were less freer because of their limited use of reason and rationality, but over centuries and with matured reason, which is also reflected in the which this increase in reason is reflected in increase of political institutions, uh, like the like we had in the nomadic tribes. What you said was that people were free, but they were not free in some sense. And then you have institutions like monarchy coming up, and then you have the rise of democracy, and where parliament, where people had the expression of reason was the highest because people have the right to choose their leaders, and that is the highest sort of expression of rationality. Okay, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Am I?
Go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
great.
Perfectly audible.
Ah. And then so we discussed this, and then we moved on to the master slave narrative. so
That's right.
in So to begin with, we had discussed it previously that consciousness, tries to destroy the difference between oneself and the other, and tries to make it the same. This desire of the self consciousness to make the other the same, and this is a contradiction that is fundamental to human consciousness. And to explain this, Hegel comes up with the master and the slave narrative, uh, which is a sort of metaphor to understand this contradiction, as was pointed out in yesterday's class. And what we talked about in the master slave narrative was that, the master is the master because there is a slave, and the slave is the slave because there is a master. So this distinction is built upon negating the identities of each other. And uh, so what we also discussed was that you phrased it very nicely in that thing. You said that in order to be who you are, one needs to have the presence of the otherness of the other, but one also wants the other to be the same. I mean, that was the contradiction that Hegel was trying to, explain through the master-slave narrative. So, the master also wants to be the master, but he also wants the slave to be his own. And what we
क्या
also discussed was that this was a sort
हाँ
of
वो तो एक्चुअली कर दी कि नहीं
Someone's mic is on.
I think Khushi, you will have to turn off your mic. Khushi Sharma, you will have to turn off your mic.
Okay, yes. So the self-consciousness, tries to dominate and destroy the other, was something that came up. And uh, the self-consciousness which rises and, takes risks becomes the master. And so this was discussed primarily in order to discuss the second stage of the dialectic, which is not something of a calm or a silent stage. This notion or this process of sublation is not a very calm process. It is a very violent conflictual process where you have notions of domination and power coming in. So that's where we stopped, and later we had the discussion with Jay. Yeah.
Right. Very good. Very good. And let's look at what Hegel himself says about master-slave dialectic. Look at page 391, right? If you look at page 391, then Hegel puts it, I think it's the third paragraph. As Hegel puts it, I don't know if you have found it in your book. Self-consciousness is desire in general. Desire is the medium through which we abolish the foreignness of the object and make it ours. That's how desire functions, right? It is through such possession, the transformation of the world, that self-consciousness asserts and recognizes itself. It is by destroying the independence of the object that it achieves certainty of itself. All right, and then he goes on to say that self-consciousness can achieve satisfaction and recognition only in another self-consciousness. And that actually is touching upon Stavan's question. Stavan, you should also watch the videos of earlier classes which you have missed, because that is what we are discussing, right? Self-consciousness arises out of this contradictory impulses. Self can become self only by negating the other, but the consciousness itself, right, tries to convert the otherness into sameness. Now, this is paradoxical. He says, in order to be certainty of my humanity, my self-consciousness, last paragraph, I must obtain recognition from an object, not from a person whom I treat as an object. So if you reduce the other to an object, that object won't have any self-consciousness, right? But you require that consciousness to mirror you. That means that the servant, the other, should also recognize you as who you are. Your parents do not become parents on their own, right? They require you to be parents. And for you to be children of your parents, you, in order to be children, you should have parents, right? The other is needed. So the relation between parent and child can also be that of striving for independence and the conflict of power, which is at the heart of the phenomenology of spirit, right? It is very much in phenomenology. Look at page 392. The struggle, because each individual must prove that he is not attached to any specific existence, not attached to life. And this involves attempting to take others' life and also risking one's own. It's only through staking one's life that freedom is won. That individual proves his essential being is not imprisoned in the immediate form of individual existence. In seeking others' death, the individual shows that he values the other person no more than himself, and that his essential being, like his own, is present in the form of an other external to him. So self exists in the other. That is very important. And these are some of the ideas that later will become important part of Jacques Lacan's theory of identity formation. So he uses the word mirror stage. Now this is not for you in syllabus. ये तो मैं extra information दे रहा हूँ. Okay, and what happens because of this? That because of this struggle of life and death, the independence of one consciousness which exists for itself and utter dependence or bondage of other consciousness which exists only for other, right? Hegel calls the former the master and later the slave or the bondsman. So master bondsman dialect is used to explain dialectical process, right? And both have to be sublated. Master and bondsman both have to transcend themselves to achieve the synthesis, the Hegelian unity which Stavan is asking. Lacan isn't there, it is there, but he is not there in exams. क्योंकि Lacan discuss करने के लिए हमें उतना ही time लगेगा जितना Hegel और कांट को दिया है, और उतना टाइम हमारे पास है नहीं. To mass matter object Smith, but also to people. And I have received a directive that I have to conduct your test before April 5th, right? So that's the directive. So we have actually not more than month and half, 30-40 days hai. We don't have much time. So whatever is possible in this, when we will have extra classes where we'll cover as much as possible. Right, Stavan? Lacan मैं आपके MA के लिए रख देता हूँ. Smith is asking a question, dismissing the difference between one and the other. He is not applying the idea to mass matter objects. In a way, yes, because after all, we are all matters. But if you look at his philosophy, Smith, then substance and subject are to be grasped as one. So matter or spirit, he doesn't make that distinction somehow. What is rational is real, what is real is rational. Does that help you to understand things a bit, Smith? Yeah, good question, nevertheless. Okay, so what happens is that there is this conflict ongoing, and when it is not resolved, one more thing that Digvijay did not bring up, he forgot, was the idea of unhappy consciousness. When servant cannot transcend his servantness or bondness, then there is an unhappy consciousness, which is a kind of resignation, which gives to philosophies like early Christianity, and it gives rise to philosophies like Stoicism that you studied, or Cynicism that you studied in your semester 5 Hellenist period after Alexander the Great, right? So that is one point that we talked about. Yes, yes, yes. Noumena goes out of the picture altogether, Stavan. Phenomena सिर्फ रह जाता है. As if noumena, which is of no use to reason, because you can never find out that, right? जो आपको कभी भी पता ही नहीं चलेगा, उसके बारे में बात क्यों करें? Kind of, right? So he circles around noumena, right? For him, phenomena is the most important aspect. Good question, nevertheless. Okay, and this becomes central, this master-servant dialectic, master-bondsman dialectic becomes important for Marx. So when we discuss Marxism, we'll look at how Marx kind of negates Hegel and postulates his idea of communist society, and he calls his theory as dialectical materialism as against dialectical idealism of Kant, right? So the name of the philosophy which Marx gave to his own philosophical approach is called dialectical materialism. Is that okay? Correct with me with this? So when we discuss Marxism, we'll talk about dialectic once again. We'll keep on revisiting Kant and Hegel like we kept on revisiting Plato and Aristotle. Repeat what? Stavan? What should I repeat? Dialectical idealism is the term that you can give to Hegel's philosophy. And dialectical materialism is the term used by Karl Marx to describe his own philosophy. Idealism believes that reality is ideas, made up of ideas. And materialism believes that reality is made up of material, and material reality exists independently of our mind, objectively. Right? This is an ontological position. Okay. How does this Hegelian idealism connect to Plato's idea of reality? Plato, again, I'm repeating the same thing, right? I must have repeated this several times. Is that Plato's idealism is ontological dualism. And he says that this phone is not a real phone, though it exists, right? So there are two phones. One is this imperfect phone here, and there is a higher perfect phone in your mind, right? And this participates in that universal phone, right? So this is ontological dualism. But German idealism, Stavan, I think all these questions came up because you were not present. Is because this phone is real and it is ideal at the same time for Kant and Hegel. Because you know this phone as the phenomena of the phone, right? And phenomenal is the real. Does that clarify, Stavan? Does that clarify for you? Nah.
Sir, I have a question.
I think the problem seems to come up when you try to directly read दोनों को ऐसे इक्वेट कर रहे हो इन सम फॉर्म. प्लेटो जो 2000 साल पहले हो गया और हेगल, इन दोनों का आप इक्वेट कर रहे हो, वो एग्जैक्टली द सेम चीजें नहीं कह रहे. या जल्दी गो अहेड.
Am I audible?
Louder. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So when Hegel talks about the self-consciousness or phenomenology of spirit, does he suggest that there is one spirit that guides the entire world, or that as in spirit as in each human has some spirit soul that way, or in what sense is he talking?
Very good question. Very good point. There is one spirit, एक ही, जो इंडिविजुअल से ऊपर है, right? So entire humanity का spirit है.
Like Longinus talked like the idea of one, the one.
Not Longinus. Plotinus.
Sorry, Plotinus. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yes. So now that we have started comparing I think Neoplatonicism is a deep influence on Hegel as well. Yeah, you find parallels. Stavan, yes, comparative analysis, very good. And there are parallels, but you cannot say that noumena phenomena distinction is equivalent to Plato's distinction between the real and the shadow, because real is knowable through reason. जो प्लेटो रियल बोल रहा है, ये फोन रियल नहीं है, आइडिया ऑफ फोन इज रियल, बट ये रियल इज नोन थ्रू रीजन. Yes, so you cannot say that Plato's idea of real and existing is same as noumena and phenomena. ये अलग concept है. Noumena and phenomena are brought into resolve in some way the rationalist and empiricist debates after 16th century, right? 1800 years after Plato. So again, historical context is very important. Yes, when you are thinking about comparisons, right? Stavan, something that you have to learn as part of this class. Right? History of criticism पढ़ रहे हैं, याद कराओ आप लोगों को हम लोग, है ना? I'm not just telling you what is Hegel saying or Kant saying. I'm just telling you why they are saying what they are saying, right? We are not discussing criticism, but history of criticism. Okay. Yes. Kant negates Hume. His dogmatic slumber. By negation, he critiques Hegel's views. I'm sorry, Kant critiques the idea by Hume that mind is tabula rasa. Very good question. Right? Mind is tabula rasa. ऐसे Hume कहता है. And all the categories of our mind, like space, time, causation, everything, are formed through associations of empirical data. Right? That is what Hume and Locke were saying. And that is how categories start happening in our mind. Kant is saying that mind itself has transcendental faculty that provides categories, and something called transcendental analytic. याद आ रहा है? आप लोगों को याद आ रहा है कुछ? Transcendental analytic. Can you see my screen?
So we can see the window, like not the document, but the list of documents.
ये हमेशा ऐसे क्यों होता होगा? Let me read again. Now?
Yes, sir, we can.
Right, so this is Kant's famous model of knowledge. So transcendental analytic provides concepts, right? Remember what Hume was saying and what Locke would say, that these concepts are formed through association of empirical data. Mind is completely blank. It is tabula rasa, यानी जो slate, कोरी slate है mind. That's what Hume is saying. So that is how he negates Hume. Stavan is asking, does that help you to understand what we are discussing? Jaldi.
Yes, sir, I do understand that.
Okay, just that we can see how Kantian paradigm might derive from Plato and his contemporaries. Then Kant is critiqued by Hegel. Yeah. And like we were talking about Neoplatonicism, Stavan, that Plotinus does not take complete Plato. In fact, he reverses some of his ideas. Remember? कि ये रियलिटी है, इमेनिसिपेशन है. सो आर्ट इज अ लैडर टू रीच द वन, राइट? इट्स पार्ट ऑफ योर स्पिरिचुअल elevation. That's what Plotinus says about Plato. Remember? So, then later on, Sir Philip Sidney will draw upon Plato, and yes, reinterpretation, modification, critique. So they are not used as they are. यानी एब्सोल्युटली वो प्लेटो की कॉपी नहीं कर रहा है प्लॉटिनस, इनफैक्ट काफी चेंज कर रहा है, राइट? सो एवरी पीरियड reinterprets and reconfigures and re-understands the earlier periods. That is what we are discussing, history of criticism. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, how many of you, those who are not saying anything in the class, they are just listening, are benefited by questions that Jaldi, Stavan, Smith, Jay ask? तितिक्षा, ये सब सवाल पूछते हैं, तो कितने लोगों को बेनिफिट होता है समझने में? रेज योर हैंड्स. Those people who are not participating by speaking in this discussion, how many of you are benefited from these questions? Raise your hands. No, nobody is benefited from this discussion?
Sir, they've all raised their hands in that
Chat
contact.
box.
No, not the chat box, but you must be seeing that list where we raise our hands to, in
Yes,
order
yes,
to respond.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, Pooja, Asma, Kinjal, Amira, Tanvi, Mansi, Amrita, Eknal, Jaldi, Saloni, Shatabdi. Yes. बाकी के लोगों को कोई बेनिफिट नहीं हो रहा है डिस्कशन से. Only 10 people are benefited. Others are not. ऐसे 13 people are benefited. $15 people. Out of 39, 15 people are benefited. Rest of them, I don't know. $17 people are benefited. Okay. So people who complain that we derail classroom discussion. Actually, it's how the questions are managed that matter, right? It may happen that some questions get derail the discussion, we go in some other direction. But then it's also my job to convert these questions into questions that are beneficial to others as well. Okay. Page 394. So in this development of consciousness, one of the most important part of dialectic, if somebody asks you what is Hegelian dialectic, then how will you respond? If somebody asks you, what do you mean by dialectic? तो क्या जवाब दोगे आप?
Sir, I guess Hegel wanted to say that he sees as dynamic of ideas, like the normal people who engage in logic do the Aristotelian syllogism, like they understand something and then from that they judge something. So it's like a continuous flow. But what Hegel meant to say was, I guess, that we have one perspective and then we are confronted by another perspective, and then this is there is a synthesis. Is it so?
Right. To make it even more simple, truth is reached at, truth is not a static thing, right? It's a dynamic process where negation also is the important, right? You can say that while Kant says truth would be something very static, but truth is reached as a movement where negation of the earlier and is very important. And then the synthesis of several views, right? And if you look back, then the term dialectic goes back to Greek philosophy itself, the term dialectic itself, right? And what Plato talks about and Socratic dialogues, does anyone remember? Involved asking questions and people would come up with various kinds of responses. Socrates would try to put them together, right? So Socrates or somebody would advance a thesis, then there would be contradictory and differing views, and then there would be synthesis, right? So the very idea of dialectic has a classical base, right? It's about dialogues. It's about different opinions and versions which lead to the higher form. So truth is not like एक आदमी ने बोल दिया वो ब्रह्म सत्य है, right? So can you see how deeply enlightenment it is? Means just because somebody says it's true, it's not true, right? And if you look at page 394, he's talking about the development of the spirit, right? As progressing from the religious consciousness to all the way through Enlightenment and French Revolution until the phase of absolute knowledge is reached. Last paragraph of 394, right? So religion has said, given one truth, which Enlightenment contradicts, negates, and finally you reach the absolute. So truth is not simple static thing that is found in books, but it's also produced through negations and refutation. Refutation of earlier is important part of reaching truth. So truth becomes a kind of destination rather than a given. How does that sound? So dialectic says that truth can be reached through a process of negation and synthesis. That's one line answer of what is dialectic, right? And truth cannot be disconnected from history because negation happens in history, right? Religion पहले आया, फिर Kant and others would negate. तो वो chronology भी होता है. And there is a linearity to it. Yeah, go ahead. Ask the question.
Please repeat the one-line answer you said about dialectic.
Yeah, dialectic is the belief that truth can be reached, right? It's not a static thing, but reached through negation and sublation. Negation and synthesis. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So it's basically historical, as Tavan rightly says. Why historical? Because temporality is introduced here. And if we go back to this idea, right? This. Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is historicity, right? So history, laws of self-consciousness, and laws of logic, all three imply it's a dialectical process of becoming. So truth is not being, but a process of becoming. So far with me?
Yes.
Okay. So that brings us to what we wanted to discuss. That is Kant's view, Hegel's views on art and aesthetics. Right? And Plato on rhetoric at length, Aristotle's ethics, Aristotle's logic, Aristotle's politics at length to understand Aristotle's poetics, right? Yes, remember? We discussed Kant's theory of reason, critique of pure reason, critique of practical reason, to discuss what Kant has to say about art. Right? We try to understand these theories of art and literature in context of their overall intellectual project. Right? In terms of Plato, in terms of Aristotle, in terms of Plotinus, in terms of maybe even Aquinas, and in terms of Kant, right? So for Hegel, we do the same. So coming to art, we have to look a bit at, go back to the dialectical understanding of work, right? Work, according to Hegel, work any calm, is, if you look at page 393, is desire held in check. Work forms and shapes the thing. Work then transforms things permanently and objectively. And the slave worker recognizes his own essential and independent being in the object he creates. The slave realizes that it is precisely his work wherein he seems to have only alienated existence he acquired in a mind of his own. What does this mean? It means that, say, for example, a maid servant is cooking for you, right? And cooking or work, according to Hegel, is expression of spirit, who you are, expression of absolute spirit. And when bondsman or the maid is cooking for you, what happens? That maid feels that that food belongs to her, but in fact it does not, right? So maid feels that that food is produced by herself, but it doesn't belong to her. The master also feels that this food belongs to her, but it is not her. Right? So there is a kind of alienation of the product that is produced by master bondsman dialectic. Right? And that would become very important for Marxist understanding of alienation and labor. Right? Marx's understanding of labor and alienation goes back to this. Yes. Yes, Tavan, that's what. And why did I bring it up before discussing his art? Is because art is also seen as an expression of the absolute spirit. Right? And as we have been discussing, art also is historical. Right? Art also moves dialectically. Right? So in his book called Introduction to Aesthetics, art is like religion and philosophy, an expression through this of spirit. Now, if you look at the term expression, then you will see how deeply romantic the idea of art is in Hegel. And you can see how closely it's associated with Wordsworth's theory of literature as expression of spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings which are recollected in tranquility, and then you express them, right? So art is no longer mimesis, right? Art is an expression, and we go back to what I said about M.H. Abraham's book called Mirror and the Lamp. So art was seen as mirror, but in Romanticism, art was seen as lamp, that is, it emanates light. And you can see the Neoplatonic influence on Romanticism here. Yeah, we talked about emanation of the one, right? Remember 5th semester? So art, interestingly and slightly disturbingly, what Hegel has to say about art is also very disturbing, because he sees art as one of the stages, right, through which both the things together, Jaladi, right, in some way he's influenced by post-Kantian philosophy of Schiller, Schelling, the German romantics, right, and Kant as well. But at the same time, he's also theorizing in a romantic way. So he's a product of his times. At the same time, he is also influencing his times. Jaldi, is that clear? But what is disturbing, that art is one of the stages, page 395, last paragraph, traversed by the absolute idea or spirit of this journey of dialectic, right? Linearity, of teleology, of movement. ये जो truth spirit की जो movement है, उसमें एक तबक्का है art, which means disturbingly that art is obsolete in some sense. Right? Though he says art is higher than nature, and you can understand how we are going back to Neoplatonicism here. On page 396, first paragraph, beauty of nature appears only as reflection of the beauty that belongs to the spirit as an imperfect, incomplete mode. And then he visits Kant, right? And for him, Kant's theory of sense, feelings, and intuition is also important. We discuss Kant and we discuss imagination being central to aesthetic experience, right? It is the sphere, second paragraph, page 396, that is essentially different from that of thought. And it is precisely the freedom of production and configuration that we enjoy in the beauty of art. It seems as if we escape from every fetter or rule and regularity. The source of work of art is the free activity of fancy, in which imagination itself is more free than nature is. And that is a kind of, he agrees with Kant's idea of autonomy of art, right? It's different from thought and philosophy. And there is also the idea that it's more free than nature, something that Sir Philip Sidney would also talk about, right? Neoplatonic idea. And art is also free alike in its end and means, page 396. So the idea of autonomy of art, which Kant has theorized, also becomes one of the important cornerstones of Hegelian thinking about art. And by free, it means that instead of subversing the ends of religion and morality, it must, like a religion and philosophy, be valid mode of expression of universal truth of the spirit. And remember the trifurcation which Kant has brought about between ethics, science, and art, right? Remember that trifurcation? And this is understood as freedom. So Kant's idea of autonomy of art is seen as growth of freedom of art from the earlier neoclassical mode, where it was mimetic, means it was subservient to nature. The neoclassical paradigm of art was reflecting art, nature. Art was holding up mirror to life. But Kant onwards, it became an autonomous discipline which gives out its own light. And again, imagination occupies a central role. Art also unifies the worlds of sense, return to nature. Page 396. I think, Stavan, you should not bring Wordsworth into Hegel or Coleridge because they are influenced by these people, and these people, German philosophers, are reinterpreted by the British writers and critics like Wordsworth and Coleridge. So don't collapse the two, right? One of the important ideas is that form and content, the idea, the sense and the intellect, nature and thought, the external and internal. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Influenced the Romantic era. Definitely. But it's not the same. यानी British Romanticism or German Romanticism एक ही नहीं है. They are influenced, but they are not the same. Okay, so form and content is brought together in an organic unity in art, according to Hegel, and this influences Coleridge's notion of imagination as well as organic unity. And interestingly, like earlier philosophers, like classical philosophers, you have a hierarchy of knowledge systems where art is superior to history. Remember good old Aristotle, but it is inferior to philosophy and religion. So it's almost a repetition of classical pattern that you find in Hegel. So the one thing that we have been discussing is that there is no absolute rupture between neoclassicism and romanticism, because romanticism also carries some classical ideas, especially the Neoplatonic ones, right? Keep that in mind. And art, though it is freer, it is also limited in the sense, last paragraph of 396, that it expresses one sphere of truth, one sphere and one stage in the whole journey of the spirit, right? It expresses one phase. So what Hegel is trying to indicate that art has lost its function in society. It has been superseded by religion and philosophy, something that people would not accept, right? So in some way, art is a development, but at the same time, it's limited by history in the way that it has been marginalized by philosophy and religion, especially Enlightenment philosophy. And interestingly, Enlightenment philosophy is the bourgeois philosophy, remember, and Hegel is the theorist of bourgeois ideology. And this marginalization of arts is something very bourgeoisie. So in some sense, you can understand how the lowest place given to humanities in our educational hierarchy has something to do with the bourgeois philosophies, right? Of the middle class utilitarian outlook. So now you understand why people consider, yes, Stavan is asking whether art was superior to religion and philosophy. In fact, it precedes that at one time, long time ago. And that's why earliest religious texts are poetic, right? They are in words and poetry, whether it's Gita or Quran or Bible. These are all poetic texts. So poetry existed before this text existed, or Vedic texts are in meter and rhymes, meters. So Chanda is something that preceded Veda also. Right? So religion was preceded by poetry and art. And then on page 397, he reconciles. And remember, Hegel's philosophy is also something that is synthetic, means he takes on board almost all philosophers, contemporary philosophers. पूरे पास्ट के और प्रेजेंट के सब फिलोसोफर्स को वो क्रिटिकली साथ में लाता है और अपनी सिस्टम बना रहा है, राइट? दैट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. So he talks about all earlier philosophers of art and how they are limited. On page 398, yes, because Titiksha, that happens because he is the theorist of the industrialized bourgeoisie, right? The middle class. So in some sense, he is the middle class, the philosopher of Western bourgeoisie. And art becomes obsolete or marginal because of the bourgeois thought. So page 398, you have very interesting theory of why people need art. So it comes out of some existential need of the spirit. On page 398, last paragraph. It is man draws out of himself and puts before himself what he is and whatever else is. Things in nature are only immediate and single. Man as a spirit duplicates himself. And you can see how work was also a form of duplication of oneself. And that's why I mentioned work as something that was important idea, because that would be taken in Marxism. But art is also a kind of expression of human self or the spirit, absolute spirit. So art comes from the same source as thought and action and philosophy. So in some way, like work, it is trying to reshape the world around us. It is also very important theory of art. On page 399, last paragraph, he talks about how art is a kind of mediate between immediate sensuousness of form and the ideal thought, means the concept and the form given by imagination. Remember our Kant. So art occupies the space in between. The sensuous aspect of art is spiritualized. Hence, spirit appears in art as made sensuous. That means accessible and pleasurable to senses like seeing. That is the essential figurative and sensuousness of art. And page 400, you have artist's vocation is to unveil the truth in the form of sensuous artistic configuration, to set forth reconciled oppositions between world of thought and sense. It reconciles like sublation. Remember, दो opposite चीजें हैं, thought और senses, उनको reconcile. And so it has to have its end and aim in itself. Again, art for art's sake, right? For other ends like instructions, purification, bettering, financial gain, struggling for fame and honor, have nothing to do with work of art as such and do not determine its nature. Page 400. अब ये डिफिकल्ट है स्तवन, तू है ना उल्टा सवाल पूछ रहा है. कांट मर गया है, राइट? So how will Kant understand somebody who comes after him is not really a good question, is it? What would Akbar think of us, or what would idea zinda hai? In some way, his ideas are built into Hegel's philosophy, and Hegel's philosophy tries to go beyond that. उसको negate करके सबलेट करने का तरीका, राइट? आइडिया जिंदा है बट वो फिक्स हो गया ना टाइम में. हेगल उसके बाद आ रहा है. So there are new ideas which cannot fit into earlier thinkers, say for example. And one of the most new idea is the art for art's sake, which would have shocked Horace, Aristotle, Plato, Plotinus, Aquinas, Sir Philip Sidney. सबको इससे थोड़ा आघात लगता. Idea of autonomy of art, art for art's sake. And yes, that's what we are coming to. Stavan's question on page 400. He says that deficiency of Kant's philosophy lies in the fact that the union of subjective and objective. Remember what Kant has said about aesthetic emotion as subjective universal. But this subjective and universal is inside the subjectivity. Can you see the screen that I have shared? दिख रहा है? माइंड के अंदर ही एक्सप्रेशन है, इंडिविजुअल सब्जेक्टिव माइंड में. इट्स नॉट एट अ हायर लेवल ऑफ एब्सोल्यूट, राइट? I hope you get what I'm saying. It is universal subjective is experienced in a person's mind, in his subjectivity, but not as objective truth, right? That is according to Hegel, his problem with Kant. That is his universe. I will take 5 more minutes if that's okay for you, right? Now, once you introduce temporality or historicity to cognition, right? Cognition is historical unfolding, right? Through negation. Then what happens here? That art also moves in historical way, right? And the first phase of art, he looks at now history of art. We discuss history of state and politics. We discuss history of philosophy. We discuss history of logic. But now you look at history of art. So the first phase of art is, according to him, the most basic phase. That is what he calls the symbolic art, page 402. Symbolic art is like, say, for example, you see God in trees, in mountain, in sun, in and that's where Greek mythology comes from, right? In wind. So you find the spirit being reflected in everywhere in nature. So you worship nature. That for him is symbolic, because sun would symbolize some aspect of divinity. Wind would have some sort of symbolic meaning, and so on and so forth. So the first phase on page 402 is the symbolic phase. So maybe patthar, right? Maybe whole stone may be seen as under divinity. We will go back to that point, Jay, tomorrow, right? Yes, they are pagan ideas, right? So the first phase is symbolic, pagan, right? Artistic pantheism, where you worship a stone. The second phase is when you see human form in stone and you give human figures to thunder and lightning. God of thunder and lightning is imagined as a human being, that is Zeus, or you find Shivlingam in the stone, right? Or you see Neptune in personification, right? But that anthropomorphism is also a term, right? So the second phase is anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic is classical art, according to him, where the spirit expresses itself as human form, having human form, right? And the third stage is represented by romantic form of art, which he sees in Christian idea of spirit, Holy Spirit, and you have heard of Holy Ghost, right? So imagining God as spirit is the highest form of art. And he finds that in Christianity. And that, according to me, is romantic conception of art. So there are three conceptions of art, historically speaking. First is you find God in stone. Second is when you chisel that stone and make a sculpture of Zeus and you worship him. That's the second phase of classical art, Greek art maybe, right? And the third phase is the Christian phase, where you imagine God as a spirit, Holy Spirit. Narcissism. Narcissus की story पता है स्तवन तेरे को? Man called Narcissus looked into water and he saw his own image and fell in love with him, right? So Narcissus turned into flower according to Arabic mythology. So word Nargis comes from Narcissus. But the point is, why do you have narcissism? Is because Hegel is explaining why you have narcissism here. Is because it's expression of the spirit as, so it's as if man imagines God in his own image, right? Almost a reverse that you find in Christianity. That's the classical phase. And the third phase is that divine is, or the spirit is imagined as a Holy Spirit, Holy Ghost. So these are the three phases of art. We'll discuss more of his ideas tomorrow, right? So any questions about what we have discussed? Yes, 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 yes. Stavan, right. Hegelian synthesis of pagan and negation of negation. Right, very good. So symbolic, classical, and romantic art. Right, this is what the history of art is. Any questions, queries? So, Stavan, now you have understood the dialectic, right? So dialectical history of art starts with immediate. So self-consciousness, if you remember, is first phase of immediate sensory experiences when you are a child. And then you have, you recognize yourself as not the other, right? So that is the second phase of negation. And the third is that of a higher phase when self and the others are sublated into higher unity, which is mediated unity. So this is three moments of dialectic, right? So dialectic is the theory that truth is not static but dynamic, based on negation and sublation. And it's an end product. And you can see the linearity over here of Hegelian thought, the teleology of thought. Okay, so if that's all for today or from your side, let's stop. And we will meet tomorrow. किसी का कोई पूछना है? Fine. So have a good day and take care.